Okay, that's the recording started, and probably a final reminder, excuse me, excuse me, probably a final reminder that these have all been recorded and are available for you to review on my YouTube channel, and there's a link to that on Teams. Today is our penultimate scheduled meeting. A reminder that next week is a student's choice. In other words, it's been deliberately left free in the syllabus for anything that you want to go over, whether that's things that we've talked about specifically in the lectures, whether it's things that we haven't talked about that you're expected to understand, such as the legislation, or anything to do with the assessment. Now, I will be here. I will be happy to talk about any or all of those. It would be nice though if there's anything in particular you want me to do, that you give me a heads up, just so that I can have it ready to go for you. So feel free to drop me an email or talk to me in Teams or all the other ways that you always get in touch with me. Okay, so for our last scheduled lecture, we want to talk about control. And control in the GRMC sense of the word. And I've mentioned before that in fact for many people GRC should be GRCC, governance, risk, compliance and control. Because of course we've already talked about control. We talked about it last week when we were talking about compliance. And what we said was that we can put controls into our systems in order to ensure our legislative compliance. Whenever we reach a specific level or there's something that may be an issue, it sets a trigger that we can use to check what's going on. Behaviour that we think is either incorrect or on the margins, or something that we want to ensure has proper authority before it goes ahead. We do that most often these days by setting up systems on our computers that constantly monitor things like, for example, a transaction. And when that transaction happens, we can check to make sure that the transaction was within the correct value limits, that it's going to a destination that we approve, that the transaction itself has had internal approval to proceed. All of those legislative issues that we've talked about to ensure that our organisation stays in compliance. But if we have that in place, if we have all those systems, if we've set up all those processes, all those procedures, all of those triggers in order to control what's happening with compliance, why don't we use that and extend it out to control what we're doing with our organisation more fully? In other words, why don't we use our systems to start implementing controls for things not just to ensure that we are legislatively compliant, but that we set up controls for our best practice in running an organisation? The distance selling regulations stipulate how long customers have to return goods that they've bought online. It might be that as part of our commitment to customer service, that we set up other controls that say, well, not just that it's within that timescale, that it's legislatively compliant, but we're going to give them more time in order to ensure best customer service. That legislation says that you must respond to a customer within 5 working days. Well, we are going to set up a control that says you have to do it within 2, again, in order to provide best customer service. But there could be other reasons for doing this. It could be to ensure that we are working well within our organisation, that we are doing the best with our staff, that we are getting the best out of our machines or our materials. If we set up a control that says we can't ship something to North Korea, why don't we set up a control that says, oh, by the way, we're supposed to have sent this out and it hasn't gone and it's now a day overdue. Can someone look into this? The mechanisms that you have to put in are the same. You still have to analyse the processes and the procedures, and you put in new controls. So we can set up these internal triggers for behaviour that we determine is incorrect, not just that the legislation has determined is incorrect, so that we can start to look at our policies and make sure that they are complied with. The other side of that, of course, is that the same kind of reports that we can get out to prove that we have been compliant can also be used to get reports to understand how well our business is running more generally. How many of our goods shipped on time? How long did it take to answer the phone on average? What was the longest time it took to answer the phone? Any metric that we want to introduce for our organisation, we can store, examine and produce information on. And those metrics might, of course, include any of the things that we have in our risk register. And I showed you some examples about a risk register for where it said things like, we may have issues with working capital. In other words, we might not have enough money in the bank at certain times to do things like, pay our employees, little things like that. By setting up controls, we can ensure that those risks that we've identified, whenever we get anywhere close to those limits that we would expect us to take action, we can set up the same sort of alert as we would get with a legislative alert. So anything that needs attention within our organisation, we can set up as a control. Also, as we were talking about with risk, there are different types of controls. You remember we talked about things like preventative. So we can set up preventative controls to stop things happening. You guys have come across it all the time. You guys are doing cybersecurity. I would be absolutely stunned if you weren't aware of the concept of an access control list. Who gets to access specific areas of the building? Who gets to access particular areas of the computer system? What rights do they have? Can they see financial information? Can they see personnel information? Can they access other people's files? What rights do they have? So we put in place preventative controls in order to stop people doing things that we don't want them to do. This isn't a new idea. What we're doing is simply formalising it. And again, as with the compliance stuff, Formalising it means that if something goes wrong, we can go back, check to see what we'd set up, and see whether we had forgotten about it, in which case we have to put in a new control for it, or whether something went wrong in its implementation, in which case we have to change the implementation and change how our processes work. So again, we're harking back to that PDCA stuff that we did. We're trying to get better. So again, not new. It's stuff that all fits together, that all comes under the general heading of making our organisation better. We started off talking about, way back in week 1, we started talking about governance, and we talked about an organisation whose financial records were seemingly falsified. Well, where were the controls for that? Where were the controls that said, oh, if you're going to write a check or do a money transfer, it has to have double sign-off, not just the financial director, for example. That might be impractical. You don't want the financial director and the managing director to sign off every financial transaction where people buy sandwiches and the bill is £25. So you might put in limits, control limits that say, yeah, okay, so if it's under £25, the manager has the right to do that, and it can be signed off just by them. If it's £10,000 and over, it has to be 2 people, and it has to be 2 of the financial director, the managing director, or the chief operating officer. Precisely what the combination of those things isn't the point. The point is that you can set them up and you can make sure that they're complied with. So again, it goes back to understanding the organisation, understanding what processes that you want to put in place, and then putting these preventative controls in place, like for your access control list, determining who gets access and to what, understanding who has the rights to what information. Sometimes it's really clear. So in a large organisation, it's sometimes really clear. The accounts department has access to financial information. Oh, no kidding. Oh, HR has access to personnel information. Oh, really? There's a shocker. But what if it's a smaller organisation without a specific finance department or without a specific HR department? How do you set up those checks and balances in a smaller organisation when by definition you have fewer people to ensure that you have these controls worked in? That can be a challenge. So I said that there's clear links to the stuff that we did with risk. We talked about preventative controls. There are also detective controls. So these are retrospective issues, things that happened and shouldn't have, either because something happened with our setup and something was allowed to happen that should never have been allowed to happen, or it was actually allowed in the setup. So someone, for example, was allowed to make a payment, but retrospectively you've decided that that was actually incorrect. So no one has actually done anything wrong. They've all followed the rules, but now we've decided actually maybe the rules aren't correct. So again, we're back to this PDCA thing. Check what's happening, act to make the rules better. because sometimes you just can't have rules that are too fixed. Sometimes you need that relaxation in order to get business done. It doesn't mean that you always allow it to happen. It doesn't mean you don't check up on it. It simply means that you let it happen and then you check that you're okay with it later. It means that staff are less likely to take advantage if they know that things are going to be checked, because our systems will detect these things that are over a level or didn't get a second signature or whatever the control might be, that they'll be found, that will be put in a report and highlighted to their boss or the compliance officer or whoever you have decided is the appropriate person. So simply because we set up controls doesn't mean that we lose the ability to be flexible in our approach to our organisation and its business, because we can ensure that we check up later as well. And I've said all the way through this course that we've been looking at these sorts of things in part because they are very close to everyone's job description these days. There are very few roles that you get that don't ask you to engage with this whole idea of governance and risk and compliance, particularly any sort of seniority level anyway. But the other reason, of course, is that there's a lot of work involved in these things. All the stuff that we've been talking about can be very difficult. You might have screeds of transactions, endless lists of transfers, multiple actions that have taken place. It is incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to examine those manually. It used to be some guy's job. I worked in a place that, it doesn't matter what it did, we'll say that it made widgets, and they had to comply with the ISO standards. This was about 20 years ago, and they had to do it manually. The guy could barely fit into his office because what he had all around his office were shelves, and those shelves were completely filled with ring binders, copies of transactions, copies of actions, copies of everything, all of which had to be kept and available to ensure that the organisation complied with the ISO standards for what they were making. The guy's photocopy bill for a start was massive, and it was really difficult to do. Imagine being in what was in essence a library and having to know every sheet of paper that's in there in case somebody comes to you and says, oh, well, on the 5th of May last year, the assistant finance officer made a transaction that went to Flintstone's company. Can we just have a quick look at that, please? And you're looking around all these folders going, right, okay. It's really hard. The person that does it has to know all the controls, has to know everything in the business, has to know every detail, and then has to keep it on paper to get back to and examine whenever anybody asks. It's really hard. So, of course, the second part of the reason that you guys are doing this course is, as with so many things, IT can help. And it will quite often land in your lap to automate these systems, to take them away from being manual, but to say, no, we're going to put them on the computer and you're going to do it. You're going to have the automatic record storage. You're going to have the ability to search for that transaction. You're going to have the preventative controls built into your systems. You're going to have the detective controls to create reports for all of those systems. It makes sense. Of course, that's where it should be. There's a lot of stuff to do, and at least once you've set it up in the computer, it's done and it's ready to go forever. But it means you have to be a lot more familiar with your systems. And I don't mean your computer systems, I mean the business's systems, the business's processes, the organization's, well, everything. Because if you're not, how are you going to automate them? How are you going to put them into your systems? So it will quite often end up on your desk. And again, I showed you that when we looked at some of the job ads that are currently out. And very many of them say GRC in there. So you'll put these things in, but to do that, you have to be familiar with why you're doing them, and then you have to be familiar with your organization. Because that means that you can put in these automated controls, which are much cheaper than having a whole bunch of clerks sitting there, going through all the bits of paper. The only errors we'll find will be yours, because it's how you have set up the control. And at least hopefully they can be easily remedied once you find them, because of course one of the things you will do when you set up a system is you will randomly sample it and do a manual check just to make sure that the automated systems are working as you would expect them to. The same as you would do if you were writing a program, in fact. But once you have those in, you're not leaving it to the whims of a particular manager about how to implement a badly defined process. Once it's written down, once it's implemented, it's there. It is defined. Whether it's good or bad is a whole other thing, and actually that might not be your problem. The best you can do is describe the process fairly, ensure that those who are involved understand what you've done, and then implement it. No interpretation, no, oh, they do it this way in accounts, but this way in HR. No, it's one process. Then once it's in there and once it's embedded into your systems, it's not just faster, it's instant detection. Correction can take a wee bit longer, of course, but at least it allows you the opportunity to alert people when there are issues. They're alerted more quickly, which means that you can mitigate more quickly. Well, mitigate, we're back to that risk stuff again. So once you've found the error, you can mitigate the error and you can do it quickly. There are also a single system. So instead of having the system that does things and the system that checks that you've done things properly, you have the system. And the doing it and checking it are done simultaneously. So those, by embedding those things into the core systems, it means that you have that peace of mind to know that these things will happen. And it's not down to somebody Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock going, oh man, I need to do the quality stuff. Tick, 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 tick. Because everything's there, everything's along with the process that it refers to. It is simultaneously done, monitored, reported, and audited. Everything all there, and everything can be analysed. One of the problems that you have with quality controls is you can't analyse everything. And a moment's thought will tell you that. If you're building a car, every so often you want to take a car off the line and check that it's okay. But quite often doing that involves breaking it. Is the door attached properly? Shuggle, 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 until the point at which the door falls off. But the point at which the door falls off is the point at which you can't sell the car. So you can't check all the cars. You can only take a sample. With automated controls, you can sample everything, at least in the virtual realm. You're still on your own for physical quality control. And as I say, once you find them, you can fix them. So we're back into mitigation again. Once you see that the policy has been violated, not only can it be fixed quickly, you can also, as part of your procedures, have the list of steps that has to be taken to fix that. So it's not down to the person you've notified to go, oh, what do we do today? Because you have said this is an issue, you can also at the same time say, well, if this ever happens, here's how to fix it. So the person getting the report can mitigate the error immediately and with a predefined set of steps. Everybody's happy. And I said it was going to be a quick one today because we talked about controls in the context of compliance last week. And I wasn't kidding. So does anybody have any questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. I'm not seeing anything in the chat, and I'm not hearing anybody coming off mute. So, the tutorial for this stuff follows the same sort of pattern. So, taking this, I want you to think about the case study and think, first of all, about access restrictions. Not IT ones, but why should their access be restricted for other reasons? And think about why. So this is part of this, trying to understand the organization's processes, not just from an IT point of view. And then thinking about what we've talked about in terms of automated versus manual control systems, start to write about that and why it's better to automate these things and put them into an IT system rather than having a manual system. Everyone happy with that? Yeah. Okay, in that case, as I said, it's a very short lecture today. That's us done. So we'll go into tutorial mode. So let me just stop the recording before we do that.